This passage centers on a core manifestation principle, often associated with Neville Goddard. The idea that your assumptions about yourself and others shape the version of reality you experience. The speech argues that relationships are not changed primarily through force, persuasion, or chasing, but through a transformation of self-concept, the beliefs, emotions, and identity you consistently carry within. Its central message is this: the version of love you experience externally often reflects the story you repeatedly tell yourself internally. The speech repeatedly emphasizes several major themes. Stop identifying with rejection, abandonment, or being forgotten. The outer world reflects inner assumptions. Emotional conviction matters more than empty affirmations. Love should not be placed above your own self-worth. Becoming secure within yourself changes how relationships unfold.
Asterisk manifestation is presented as self-transformation rather than control over another person. One of the strongest metaphors in the passage is the mirror analogy. A mirror cannot change first. The face before it must change first. This symbolizes the belief that external circumstances shift after internal identity shifts. The passage encourages the listener to stop reacting emotionally to silence, distance, or appearances, and instead embody the feeling of already being valued, loved, and chosen. At a psychological level, the speech touches on something real and important. Self-concept deeply affects behavior, confidence, emotional stability, communication patterns, and relationship dynamics. People who feel secure and worthy often behave differently than those operating from fear or desperation, and that difference can influence relationships significantly. A strong concluding idea for this entire speech could be: the moment you stop searching for proof of love outside yourself and begin embodying the feeling of already being worthy, chosen, and valued within, your entire reality begins to shift. Not because you forced another person to change, but because you changed the story you carried about yourself. The outer world reflects the identity you consistently accept as true, and when you finally believe you are unforgettable, life begins to mirror that belief back to you. And this is why the world changes the moment you stop fearing what you see and start trusting what you know within yourself. The visible world has always been delayed. It is an echo, a shadow, a reflection of states once entertained in consciousness. But most people spend their entire lives imprisoned by reflections. They bow before appearances as though appearances possess creative authority. They stare at silence and call it rejection. They look at distance and call it loss. They witness temporary circumstances and declare them permanent truths. Yet nothing in this world is permanent except the state you continually return to within yourself. You must understand this deeply. Reality is not happening to you. It is happening through you. Every relationship, every interaction, every repeated pattern has first existed as an inner assumption before it appeared externally. The outer world only mirrors the emotional convictions you carry most naturally. And because of this, no circumstance is final unless you continue giving it life through your attention. This is why the moment you stop identifying as abandoned, abandonment begins losing its place in your world. The moment you stop seeing yourself as forgotten, the world can no longer convincingly reflect neglect back to you. The moment you accept yourself as chosen, cherished, unforgettable, and deeply loved, reality itself must begin reorganizing around that new identity. Not because you forced another person to change, but because consciousness has shifted at the source. Most people attempt to change outcomes while remaining inwardly the same. They affirm love while secretly fearing rejection. They visualize commitment while emotionally preparing for disappointment. They ask for reassurance because inwardly they still feel uncertain of their worth. And so the outer world faithfully mirrors the instability they continue nurturing within themselves. But the one who truly understands this law moves differently. They no longer chase. They no longer beg. They no longer panic over silence. They no longer measure their value by another person's behavior. Instead, they become inwardly established in the feeling of already being loved. They walk through life with the quiet calm of someone who no longer questions whether they are worthy of devotion. And that inner stability becomes magnetic, not through force, manipulation, or control, but through the natural law of consciousness itself. For what feels natural within you eventually becomes natural around you. And so the real transformation was never about another person at all. It was always about self. It was always about the identity you accepted as true when no evidence appeared before you. Could you still feel loved before the message arrived? Could you still feel chosen before circumstances changed? Could you still feel secure while the outer world remained silent? That is faith. Faith is not emotional desperation disguised as hope. Faith is inner knowing. It is loyalty to the unseen reality you have accepted within yourself. It is the ability to remain unmoved by temporary appearances because you understand that appearances are only shadows of previous states. The visible world is always catching up to consciousness. This is why persistence matters so deeply. Not obsessive effort, not emotional force, but persistence in identity, persistence in the assumption, persistence in the feeling of already being who you desire to be. The person who constantly searches for proof remains trapped in waiting. But the person who internally accepts fulfillment enters peace, and peace is powerful. Because once you truly feel secure within yourself, fear begins dissolving. You stop obsessing over timing. You stop worshipping delays. You stop treating temporary separation as eternal truth. You begin understanding that reality is fluid, always shifting, always responding, always reorganizing itself according to the state you occupy most consistently. Then something extraordinary happens. The relationship with yourself changes first. You no longer wake up asking, "Why haven't they chosen me?" Instead, you begin living from, "Of course I am loved." You no longer wonder, "What if they leave?" Instead, you feel, "I am unforgettable." You no longer fear silence. You no longer fear time. You no longer fear appearances. Because you finally understand that circumstances do not create your worth. They only reflect the worth you already believe yourself to possess. And when this realization fully settles into your consciousness, the outer world begins responding in ways that feel almost miraculous. People soften toward you. Communication changes. Doors reopen. Distance collapses. What once felt impossible begins unfolding naturally. Not because you forced reality, but because you stopped resisting the version of yourself that already possessed what you desired. That is the true secret. The wish fulfilled is not something you chase. It is a state you enter, a state where longing disappears because inwardly you already feel complete, a state where anxiety dissolves because you no longer identify with loss, a state where love no longer feels fragile because it is rooted first within yourself. And once you live from that state long enough, reality has no choice but to mirror it. This is why you must stop looking to the outer world for permission to feel whole. Stop asking circumstances to validate your worth. Stop allowing temporary appearances to define your future. The present moment is not the final chapter. It is only the visible expression of old assumptions now fading away. A new reality begins the moment a new state is accepted within. And so if tonight you choose to release the old identity, the abandoned version, the fearful version, the rejected version, the version constantly waiting to be chosen, then a new reality begins forming immediately beneath the surface. You may not see movement instantly, but movement will already have begun. Thoughts begin shifting, energy begins changing, bridges of events begin forming, conversations begin aligning, hearts begin softening. Reality begins rearranging itself around the new consciousness you now occupy. This is why imagination is sacred. This is why inner conversations matter. This is why feeling matters. Because the world you experience tomorrow is being shaped by the consciousness you accept today. So no longer identify with fear, no longer rehearse abandonment, no longer repeat stories of rejection. Instead, enter fully into the awareness of being loved now, chosen now, valued now, desired now, secure now, not someday, not when circumstances change, now. For the moment you truly accept within yourself, "I am already loved, I am already chosen, I am already worthy," the entire structure of your reality begins shifting to reflect it. And that is why the outer world was never the true source of your power. You were. They may call it love, but beneath the surface they are bracing themselves for abandonment. They enter connection already fearing silence, fearing distance, fearing betrayal, fearing replacement. And because consciousness faithfully reflects what is emotionally dominant, they unknowingly recreate the very pain they hope to avoid. Fear becomes prophecy. Anxiety becomes atmosphere. Doubt becomes experience. But the moment you truly understand who you are, fear begins losing its foundation. For what is fear except the belief that love exists outside of you? What is fear except the assumption that another person possesses the power to determine your worth? And what is insecurity except dependence upon external validation for inner peace? Yet the truth is far greater than this. Love was never meant to be chased through suffering. It was never meant to be earned through emotional exhaustion. It was never meant to leave you feeling small, powerless, or incomplete. Real love begins within consciousness first. The outer relationship is only the echo of the relationship you hold with yourself inwardly. And this is why no lasting transformation can occur until self-concept changes. For even if your specific person returned today, if inwardly you still identified as fearful, abandoned, and insecure, eventually the same patterns would reappear. Not because love failed, but because consciousness continued reproducing the same state. This is why the true work has never been about getting another person. It has always been about becoming internally aligned with the version of yourself who no longer fears love. The version of you who feels chosen naturally. The version of you who expects devotion without anxiety. The version of you who no longer watches the world desperately for reassurance because they already carry reassurance within themselves. That is the transformation. And once this shift occurs, you stop reacting emotionally to every movement in the outer world. Silence no longer terrifies you because your identity is no longer built upon external confirmation. Delays no longer feel personal because you understand that circumstances are temporary echoes, not permanent truths. You stop interpreting every moment through fear because inwardly you already know who you are. You are loved. You are desired. You are remembered. You are valuable. You are irreplaceable. Not because another person temporarily proves it to you, but because you have finally accepted it as part of your being. And when this acceptance deepens, your entire energy changes. You become calm where you once panicked, certain where you once doubted, magnetic where you once chased. People feel this shift even when no words are spoken. Because the strongest communication in this world is not verbal, it is energetic. It is the silent atmosphere produced by self-concept. Others unconsciously respond to the assumptions you hold about yourself. If inwardly you expect rejection, you radiate tension, fear, and emotional grasping. But if inwardly you feel secure in love, your presence itself becomes comforting, attractive, and unforgettable. This is why the one who no longer chases often becomes the one pursued. Not through manipulation, not through games, but through embodiment. For the outer world always rearranges itself around the identity you most consistently occupy. And this is why inner conversations matter so deeply. Every silent sentence repeated within yourself becomes instruction to the subconscious mind. Every thought accepted emotionally becomes creative. The mind is never idle. It is always shaping future experience through repetition. So if every day you inwardly repeat, "They are losing interest. They do not care. I am not enough. They will leave me," then those assumptions slowly crystallize into reality. But if instead you begin repeating inwardly, "I am deeply loved. I am unforgettable," our connection grows stronger every day. They feel naturally drawn back to me. I am always chosen. Then a new state begins forming within consciousness. And once a state becomes natural inwardly, reality eventually mirrors it outwardly. This is why persistence is sacred. Not force, not obsession, not desperation. Persistence in identity. Persistence in the feeling of already being loved. The old story may still echo for a while. Old fears may occasionally rise to the surface because they were repeated for years. But do not become discouraged by this. A state survives only through attention. Withdraw emotional loyalty from fear, and it slowly weakens. Return consistently to the fulfilled state, and it strengthens. The mind becomes what it repeatedly inhabits, and eventually the new identity begins feeling effortless. You no longer need constant affirmations because the feeling itself becomes natural. You no longer struggle to believe because belief has stabilized into knowing. You no longer attempt to manifest love because you already feel connected to it inwardly. This is where true power begins. For the person who feels complete within themselves no longer radiates need. And need is what pushes love away most often. Desperation says, "I do not believe I can naturally receive love." Fear says, "I must control the outcome before I can feel safe." But inner security says, "What is meant for me cannot miss me. I am already worthy of extraordinary love. I do not chase what naturally belongs with me." And reality responds to that certainty with astonishing precision. The bridge of events begins unfolding. Unexpected messages appear. Conversations soften. Distance dissolves, circumstances shift, reconnection happens naturally, not because you forced another person's will, but because consciousness itself has reorganized around a new concept of self. This is why imagination is not fantasy, it is creation. Every imaginal act accepted with feeling plants a seed within the subconscious. And the subconscious, being infinitely creative, begins orchestrating conditions, encounters, timing, and circumstances to mirror the state impressed upon it. So when you imagine lovingly, do not observe from a distance. Enter the scene fully. Feel the warmth of the relationship already restored. Hear their voice speaking lovingly to you. Feel the ease of knowing you are secure together. Allow your nervous system to experience fulfillment now rather than postponing peace until after manifestation appears. Because manifestation does not create the feeling creates manifestation. The outer world is always secondary. And once you truly understand this, something extraordinary happens. You stop fearing the future entirely. Why? Because you realize your power was never in controlling circumstances. Your power was always in choosing the state you occupy within yourself. No appearance can overpower a sustained state of consciousness. No delay can cancel what is consistently assumed. No obstacle can permanently resist an identity fully accepted inwardly. And this is why you must stop seeing yourself as someone waiting to be loved someday. Become the version of yourself who already is. Walk as them, think as them, feel as them, rest as them. For the subconscious does not distinguish between what is physically happening and what is emotionally accepted as real within imagination. And eventually, inevitably, faithfully, the world begins reflecting back the love you first dared to give yourself within consciousness. That is the law. That is the transformation. That is the end of fear. For once you truly know you are already loved within, nothing outside of you can convince you otherwise again, their own worth. For the greatest transformation does not happen when another person changes. It happens when you change the story you have been telling yourself about love, about relationships, and most importantly, about who you are within them. The fearful version of you believed love was fragile. They believed affection could disappear overnight. They believed silence meant rejection and distance meant abandonment. So they watched constantly for signs that something was going wrong. They searched for reassurance because inwardly they never felt secure. But the awakened version of you understands something entirely different. Love does not become stable because you control another person. Love becomes stable when you stop identifying with fear. The moment you stop emotionally preparing for loss, you stop creating experiences that mirror loss back to you. And this is why inner transformation changes everything. You no longer enter relationships trying desperately to avoid pain. You enter them from fullness, from confidence, from inner security. And that energy changes the entire atmosphere around you. People can feel when someone is emotionally dependent upon outcomes. They can feel the pressure of fear, the tension of insecurity, the silent desperation hidden beneath words. But they can also feel peace. They can feel certainty. They can feel the calm presence of someone who no longer doubts their value. That presence is powerful, because the person who truly knows they are worthy no longer needs to convince anyone to stay. They no longer cling to love with fear in their heart. They no longer chase affection to feel complete. Instead, they radiate quiet assurance. And that assurance becomes magnetic because it reflects emotional wholeness rather than emotional lack. You must understand this clearly. The world does not respond primarily to what you say. It responds to what you believe yourself to be. If you secretly believe, I am easy to leave, I am never fully chosen, love eventually disappears. Then even beautiful relationships become clouded by anxiety because consciousness keeps searching for confirmation of those assumptions. But when you begin identifying differently, when you begin feeling, I am deeply valued, I am naturally chosen, I am unforgettable, love remains with me naturally, then your entire experience of relationships begins shifting, not because you forced reality, not because you manipulated another person, but because you changed the state from which reality was being reflected. This is why Neville taught that imagination creates reality. The imaginal act is not merely fantasy. It is the acceptance of a new identity. And identity is the hidden force behind every experience you attract. So if tonight you stop identifying as the abandoned one, if tonight you release the version of yourself who constantly fears being replaced, if tonight you finally decide, I am no longer someone who begs for love, I am someone who naturally receives it, then a new chapter begins within consciousness immediately. At first, the outer world may appear unchanged. Old circumstances may still linger for a while because reality reflects previous states with delay. But do not become discouraged by appearances. The mirror does not change before the face changes. The inner transformation always comes first. Persist. Persist in the feeling of already being loved. Persist in the assumption of mutual devotion. Persist in the identity of someone who no longer fears abandonment. Not forcefully, not anxiously, but naturally. Return again and again to the version of yourself who feels secure, chosen, and emotionally free. Eventually, this state begins feeling more familiar than the old story ever did. And once it feels natural, reality begins conforming automatically. Your specific person begins responding differently because you are no longer relating to them from fear. Your conversations change because your energy changes. Your reactions soften because desperation no longer controls your mind. Love begins flowing more peacefully because inwardly you have stopped resisting it through anxiety. And perhaps the most beautiful part of all this is that the moment you no longer desperately need the relationship to validate your worth is often the exact moment the relationship begins healing most deeply. Why? Because fear no longer stands between you and love. You are no longer trying to get love. You are expressing it. You are embodying it. You are becoming it. And reality always mirrors what you consistently embody. So stop measuring your future by present appearances. Stop searching the outer world for proof every hour. Stop allowing temporary silence to define permanent destiny. Instead, become loyal to the new identity. Wake each morning not as someone hoping to be chosen someday, but as someone who already is. Walk differently, think differently, feel differently, not pretending, not forcing, but accepting inwardly, I am worthy of extraordinary love. I am naturally remembered. I am deeply prioritized. I am safe in love. I am already chosen. The subconscious accepts what feels natural, and whatever feels natural eventually becomes external fact. This is the law. And once you truly understand it, fear begins disappearing from your relationships entirely. Because you finally realize that love was never meant to be held together through anxiety, control, or emotional exhaustion. It was meant to flow from inner certainty. So tonight, let the old fearful identity fall away. Let the abandoned version of yourself dissolve. Let the anxious watcher finally rest. You are no longer the person waiting outside the door of love, hoping to be invited in. You are the person who already belongs there. And as you continue occupying that state inwardly, life itself begins moving to confirm it. The messages come. The distance softens. The connection deepens. The reunion unfolds. Not because you forced the universe to obey you, but because you finally aligned yourself with the reality you desired, instead of the fear you once carried. And from that moment forward, love no longer feels uncertain. It feels natural.